How old were you when you got together?
I was 17.
And I was 21.
Right. Love at first sight, was it?
Very.
Yeah, very much so.
So tell us how you met, where you met, what you thought of her.
Well, we met at Brands Hatch. I was competing in Formula 3 at the time. And some friends obviously knew Annette, and she liked the racing. So she came along, and when I came into the paddock, the group was standing there, and I was climbed out of the car, and I spotted sight of her, and the old heart fluttered, and...
Was it literally was love at first
Oh, yeah,
sight?
absolutely.
What was it about Annette that made you feel like that?
It's her eyes and a smile. It's gorgeous.
So you were 17, so this hunky racing driver, as he was.
He was.
It was love at first sight for him. What did you think when you were introduced?
To be frank, I fancied
You fancied
straight away.
him?
You've said that before.
Yeah, and it was... I was gone. Totally
And you got together, you know, you were a couple very quickly. You know, the chemistry was there. You clicked,
Instantly.
and that was
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
You proposed and you got married, what, a couple of years later?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And this was November 1981.
That's right.
So very happily married.
Yeah.
Then your son Stuart came along.
Yeah.
Yeah, love of my life, yeah.
Love of your life, all very good. You used to go around, obviously, with Duncan on the racing circuit. But there comes a point in that when the children are growing up, they've got to go to school.
Yeah.
That becomes more difficult.
That became tough.
Yeah. So what started happening then in your relationship?
Well, Duncan was going off doing the racing, days at a time, also had a full-time job as well. I was at home doing the wifely thing.
Bringing up your son.
Yeah, which is what I wanted. I wanted the family unit. I craved for that, and we had that, and then started to break off.
And it's just lack of time, I suppose, Duncan, just with your job and the racing, you just
The racing
away
career
too
took
much.
off, obviously with Annette's help as well, because she used to help me get the sponsorships. She would encourage me to make the extra phone calls to try and raise the money, because there were times when, it was difficult to get the money. And when the career started taking off, it meant more travelling, more testing at the circuits, which meant more time away. Without realising it, over a period of time, distance started growing between us.
And you eventually split, and your lives go in totally opposite directions because you have other relationships, and you both get married to other people.
We followed a parallel timeline.
Yeah.
We both had 3 relationships in between. We both married in between those relationships. Everything we did in those years was exactly the same.
That's quite handy, because then one can't blame the other on something.
But what about your son? Obviously, you had Stuart, so how did that work out with you seeing your son? Because you lost contact eventually, so how did that happen?
Initially, I was seeing them every couple of weeks. But over a period of time, it became harder for me, which some people might understand, but some people might not. Because I was still very much in love with Annette, and I realised what I'd lost, my soulmate, my best friend. And it just became harder and harder, my feelings for her. So eventually I moved nearly 200 miles away because I couldn't cope with my feelings.
Stuart keep seeing her.
It was hard, very hard.
But Stuart was integral in all of this. Annette, tell us how he was integral in bringing you both back together again eventually. Tell us about that.
He often talked about his dad, and the more he talked about him, obviously the more it's on his mind. He came and said to me one day, I really, really want to find Dad. Will you help me? And I said, of course I will. And I was glad he said that, because in a funny sort of way, I wanted to find out where he was, what he was doing, always on my mind, because he's my father, my son. And obviously I'd had feelings for him anyway, but I tried to move on.
He was up in Yorkshire.
He was up in,
Yorkshire. So off you and Stuart go, you make the journey to Yorkshire.
Yeah.
What was that meeting like, Stuart? How did that happen? Did you just knock on the door? Did you know they were coming?
I have no idea. I'd just gone through the bowel cancer and fighting that, and so...
Oh, you had cancer at the time,
yeah.
So you found out he was ill as well, yeah.
So it was a difficult time. So I was in a dressing gown, and there was a knock at the door, and I'll never forget it, because this big figure was standing at the door. Bear in mind, I hadn't seen him since he was 8, so I didn't recognise him, and he asked, "Are you Duncan Gray?" So I said, "As you would, who wants to know?" And he said, "Are you Duncan Gray?" And he said, "Who wants to know?" And then eventually he brought the birth certificate out. He said, "Well, I'm Stuart Gray with that." And I just went, boom.
You fainted. But why hadn't you stayed in touch with your son?
I found it very difficult because of my feelings for Annette.